Tov v'chesed yirdefuni al yemei chayei. This is the Hebrew of the last verse of Psalm 23. Goodness and love pursues me all the days of my life. My prayer for us is that those words would live in our minds and rest in our hearts all the days of our lives. I invite you to be seated. If you are like me, you associate Psalm 23 with funerals and hospital visits. And with good reason, because Psalm 23 is an amazing song of God's comforting presence that is always with us, even in the most challenging of circumstances. But Psalm 23 shouldn't just be reserved for hospital visits and funerals. Psalm 23 contains one of the keys to living the kind of life that Reverend Thomas invited us into last week. Thomas kicked off our sermon series, Rooted in Gratitude, by inviting us to be a people of open hearts, open hands, and open minds. In order for us to be rooted in gratitude, we must push away fear and distrust and cynicism and take hold of the reality that God's goodness and love is always with us. In small doses, fear can be a good thing. If you're walking on a trail and all of a sudden you're about to step on the head of a rattlesnake, that jolt of fear and the adrenaline it brings might be helpful in helping you jump out of striking range. But when fear and distrust sit with us and cynicism becomes our way of life, it causes us to act in crazy ways. We see this in our Old Testament reading this morning. We meet the Hebrew people as they are on an epic journey. God has delivered them out of slavery in Egypt. God has led them through a sea split in two. God has been a vanguard of fire through the desert, leading them to their new home. And now they've stopped to camp. And God invited their leader Moses up to the summit of a mountain in order to have a meeting. And Moses was gone for 10 days. And during those 10 days, the people became afraid and distrustful. So what they did is they gathered up all their jewelry, melted it down, formed a bowl, and said, "That thing is our God." It's kind of crazy. But friends, we do silly things too. I look back at my life, and there are moments in which I've said, I can't be faithful in that situation. I can't show that person love. It's impossible for me to be generous. I ball up my hands, and instead of living like Reverend Thomas invited me, with open hands and open minds and open hearts. Well, there's an amazing story about a Russian weightlifter named Vasily Alexeyev. In the 1970s, Alexeyev was in a weightlifting competition, and he was doing a clean and jerk, where he grabs a barbell, lifts it up, puts it above his head. He cleaned and jerked 496 pounds. Huge amount of weight. That lift would have made him win the competition. But he had one more lift available to attempt. So he added 2 more pounds to make 498 pounds. Because if he lifted that, he would set a world record in addition to winning the competition. I find it kind of funny that he didn't just go ahead and add 2 more pounds to make it an even 500. But at that time, people thought it was physically impossible for a human to lift 500 pounds over their head. People had been trying it for years, and no one was able to do it. It was a physical impossibility. And so Alexeyev didn't even want to attempt it. Well, Alexeyev walked up to the bar, gripped it, lifted it up over his head, 498 pounds, set a new world record. In those international weightlifting competitions, after someone makes a lift like that, they roll the barbells onto a scale, because weights can vary a little bit from how they're marked. So they rolled it onto the scale, and it showed up as 501 pounds. Alexeyev had done the impossible, and he didn't even realize it. But that's not the interesting thing to me about this story. The interesting thing to me is that in the year after Alexeyev accidentally lifted 501 pounds, 7 more people lifted over 500 pounds. It shows that what was going on to prevent people from lifting that weight wasn't a physical impossibility with the human body. It was mental. People didn't believe they could do it, and so they couldn't. It's like that with our life of faith. Fear, distrust, and cynicism causes us to shrink back from God's invitation to be a people of open hearts, open hands, and open minds. This is why we sing Psalm 23. Our translations of that last verse are really beautiful, but they don't quite capture the velocity and intensity of what God is saying. The Hebrew pictures God pursuing after us like an attack dog, like a Navy SEAL pursuing a target and not letting it out of the sights. But instead of aggression, God pursues us unrelentingly with goodness and love. Psalm 23 says there is no place that you can ever hide from God's love. There is no moment in the entire span of your life where God is not working for your care, even in the most difficult, challenging moments where it seems like there is no exit. God is there. That reality of God's ever-ceasing love and care shakes off fear, distrust, and cynicism, and helps us take hold of that life that turns our fists into open hands. Goodness and love pursues me all the days of my life. Amen.